In the age of social media, where fame seems just a click away, many are seduced by the instant allure of likes and followers, believing it will bring happiness and fulfillment. But what few realize is the dark price that can come with this sudden notoriety. Have you ever wondered if online exposure might be more dangerous than beneficial? What if the pursuit of validation on social media actually opens the door to your worst nightmares? Get ready, because in the following lines, we'll delve into a real and disturbing case that reveals a shocking truth. What seems like a quick and harmless reward may, in fact, be the gateway to an unimaginable world of terror. In the heart of a small town in upstate New York, Bianca Devins was a young woman like so many others, struggling to find her place in a world increasingly dominated by digital presence. Growing up in a loving yet emotionally challenging family, Bianca was always a peculiar girl, standing out for her height and distinctive appearance. She became deeply involved in online culture, finding in the internet a way to escape the pressures of the real world. At just 17 years old, she had already experienced more pain and loneliness than many adults. But, like many teenagers, Bianca also found refuge online, a place where she could be whoever she wanted, far from the judgmental eyes of her schoolmates. It was in this setting that Bianca met Brandon Clark, a 21-year-old man with a dark past and a heart full of sinister intentions. The beginning of their friendship seemed harmless, a connection formed through shared interests and exchanges of compliments that made Bianca feel special. Brandon, with his manipulative charm, quickly became a constant presence in Bianca's life. He flooded her with messages, flattering comments on all her posts, and seemingly kind gestures that made her believe she had found a true friend. However, what Bianca didn't know was that behind the facade of a caring young man, Brandon harbored an insane desire for possession and control. Bianca's home, a modest and cozy residence, was often the backdrop for these interactions. There, in her room, surrounded by anime posters and carefully installed LED lights, Bianca spent hours exchanging messages with Brandon. She saw him as a sort of confidant, someone who seemed to understand her inner struggles and fears. On the other side of the screen, however, Brandon saw in Bianca an easy prey, someone he could mold and manipulate to satisfy his own sick desires. As their friendship deepened, Brandon began to weave his web. He knew exactly what to say to gain Bianca's trust and, more importantly, how to feed her insecurities. "You're the most amazing person I've ever met, Bianca. I would do anything for you," he would say, his voice always calm but with an intensity that made Bianca believe every word. And so, unknowingly, Bianca began to distance herself from other friendships, further isolating herself in the virtual world she had built around Brandon. Bianca's mother, Kim, watched with a mix of relief and concern. Relief because, after so many years of struggling with her daughter's mental health, Bianca finally seemed happy and connected with someone. But there was also a latent worry, a maternal instinct whispering that something was not right. Kim tried to talk to Bianca about her feelings for Brandon, but she was always met with evasive and defensive answers. "He's just a friend, Mom. Nothing more. You don't need to worry," Bianca would say, not realizing that with each message, with each interaction, she was drawing closer to a tragic fate. What no one knew was that in that small New York town, under the guise of a seemingly harmless friendship, something far more sinister was unfolding. Brandon Clark had plans for Bianca, and those plans were about to turn her life, and everyone around her, into a living nightmare. As the months passed, the relationship between Bianca and Brandon became increasingly complex. He infiltrated every aspect of her life, creating an illusion of closeness and trust that obscured his true intentions. Bianca, still naive and starved for affection, believed she had found someone who finally understood her, someone who truly cared about her. But the truth was that Brandon was far from being a friend. His obsession with Bianca grew daily, fueled by a sick need for control and domination. The conversations between them, once light and casual, began to take on a darker tone. Brandon spent hours discussing Bianca's insecurities, subtly yet relentlessly exploiting her vulnerabilities. "I know you don't trust many people, Bianca, but I'm here for you always. No one understands you like I do," he would say, reinforcing the idea that she couldn't trust anyone else. And Bianca, already weakened by years of battling her own demons, began to distance herself even further from the few friendships she still maintained. Brandon, on the other hand, was always present, ready to comfort her when she felt down, to listen when she needed to vent. He became Bianca's anchor, but this anchor was slowly pulling her down into an abyss from which she would not escape. Bianca's sleepless nights became more frequent, and instead of seeking help, she turned to Brandon, who was always online, always available, like a shadow watching her in silence, waiting for the right moment to act. Brandon's obsession reached its peak when Bianca began to show interest in someone else. A boy she had met online, someone who seemed genuinely interested in her in a way that Brandon could never be. When Bianca casually mentioned in a conversation that she was excited to meet this new friend at a concert, something inside Brandon snapped. Outwardly, he remained calm, but inside, the thought of losing Bianca to someone else consumed him. He knew he had to do something to prevent that, and that's when his plan began to take shape. Brandon started obsessively researching, spending hours on the internet, exploring dark forums and websites. He searched for anything that could help him keep Bianca under his control. How to make someone fall in love with you quickly evolved into how to ensure no one else can have her. He was looking for ways to keep Bianca captive, to stop her from escaping his sphere of influence. And the more he researched, the more his desire for possession transformed into a terrible and irreversible idea. Meanwhile, Bianca, oblivious to the imminent danger, continued making plans for the concert. She was excited, perhaps for the first time in a long while, feeling that life was finally starting to make sense again. But what she didn't know was that while she dreamed of a promising future, Brandon was planning something that would deprive her of any future. And so, as the day of the concert approached, Brandon's intentions became increasingly clear, at least to him. The day of the concert finally arrived. Bianca, eager, dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that reflected her unique personality, a mix of anime elements and alternative fashion that made her stand out in the crowd. She looked at herself in the mirror and smiled, feeling a rare sense of contentment. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel hopeful, a sense that things were changing for the better. Brandon arrived at Bianca's house at the agreed time. He waited in the car, a neutral expression on his face, but inside, his mind was simmering with a mix of anger and despair. As Bianca said goodbye to her mother, Kim, a sense of unease passed over her. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what. "Have fun, sweetheart, and come home early, please," Kim said, trying to ignore the premonition. Bianca nodded with a smile and left, unaware that this would be the last time she would see her mother. In the car, the silence between Bianca and Brandon was palpable. She was excited, talking about the concert and how thrilled she was to meet her new friend, while Brandon listened in silence, each of her words resonating in his mind like a hammer. As they approached the concert venue, Bianca's discomfort began to grow. Brandon was unusually quiet, and his silence unnerved her. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to break the tension. Brandon forced a smile. "Yes, I'm just a bit tired," he replied, but his voice had a cold tone that made Bianca shrink slightly. Deep down, she knew something was wrong, but she decided to ignore it, hoping things would improve. The concert was everything Bianca had hoped for. She had fun, laughed, and lost herself in the music, forgetting her worries for a moment. But even then, she couldn't help but notice Brandon's constant presence, always nearby, always watching. When she finally met her friend, Brandon kept his distance, his eyes fixed on them as they talked and laughed. Bianca noticed his expression but chose to ignore it, trying to focus on the moment. However, the discomfort continued to grow inside her, like a shadow that couldn't be avoided. When the concert ended, Bianca was exhausted but happy. She and Brandon returned to the car, and the silence between them was heavier than ever. She tried to start a conversation, but he responded only with monosyllables, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Bianca finally gave up and closed her eyes, fatigue taking over her. She didn't know that at that moment, Brandon had already decided what he would do. As he drove, he glanced at the sleeping Bianca in the rearview mirror, his thoughts growing darker. As they approached a deserted road, far from the city lights, Brandon turned towards a spot he had previously chosen, a place where he knew they wouldn't be disturbed. Bianca, still asleep, had no idea what was about to happen. Brandon parked the car and turned off the engine, the absolute silence enveloping the surroundings like the prelude to a tragedy about to unfold. Bianca awoke with a slight start, feeling the car stop. She looked around, still confused, and realized they were in an unfamiliar place. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice still groggy from sleep. Brandon watched her for a moment before responding, his voice soft but laden with barely disguised tension. "We need to talk, Bianca, about what happened tonight," he said, his words carefully chosen, as if he were walking through a minefield. Bianca's heart began to beat faster, a feeling of discomfort growing inside her. She tried to stay calm, remembering that Brandon had always been a trustworthy friend, even if sometimes he became possessive. "Sure, we can talk, but why here? Can't we wait until we're home?" she suggested, her voice trembling. But Brandon shook his head, his eyes fixed on hers as if he were trying to read her thoughts. "I just want to understand, Bianca," he said, his voice taking on a darker tone. "I want to understand why you did this, why you brought me here just to be with another guy. Don't you understand how that makes me feel?" Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. She knew Brandon could be intense, but there was something different in that moment, something she couldn't quite identify. "Brandon, we've already talked about this. We're friends. I told you I wasn't looking for a relationship," she responded, trying to keep her voice firm. But fear was beginning to creep into her words. Brandon laughed, but it was not a joyful sound. It was an empty, humorless laugh, full of bitterness. "Friends? Bianca, I did everything for you. I stood by you when no one else did. And this is how you repay me? With disdain." His voice rose, the tone becoming increasingly aggressive. Bianca shrank back in her seat, the fear growing inside her like an uncontrollable tide. She realized there was nothing normal about this conversation, that the man in front of her was no longer the Brandon she thought she knew. "Brandon, please, you're scaring me. Let's go back home. We can talk about this there," she pleaded, trying to calm him. But her words only seemed to fuel his anger. Brandon watched her in silence for a moment before opening the car's trunk and retrieving something. When he turned back to her, he was holding a knife, and the look in his eyes was one of pure determination. "You're not going anywhere, Bianca. Not while I'm here," he said, his voice now cold and emotionless. The fear that Bianca felt exploded into absolute panic. She tried to open the car door, but Brandon was faster, grabbing her arm with force. "Don't do this, Bianca. Don't make me do something you'll regret," he said, his voice threatening. But Bianca knew she was in mortal danger. She pulled her arm with all the strength she had, trying to break free. "Brandon, please, don't do this," she begged, tears streaming down her face. But it was too late. Brandon had already decided her fate. With a swift movement, he pressed the knife against her throat, and Bianca's scream was cut short by the horrific sound of metal against flesh. She tried to hold on to life, but her strength quickly left her, and all that remained was the sound of silence as Brandon watched Bianca's life slip away before his eyes. With Bianca's life rapidly fading, Brandon felt a mix of triumph and emptiness. The plan he had formulated in his sick mind was unfolding exactly as he had imagined. He watched as the terror in Bianca's eyes gave way to a vacant, lifeless stare. The silence that followed was deafening. But Brandon, far from feeling remorse, seemed to be in a trance-like state, as if operating on pure automation. He picked up his phone, his fingers trembling slightly, but not from fear or regret. There was a morbid excitement in his actions, a sense of absolute power he had never experienced before. He positioned the phone to capture Bianca's lifeless body and began taking pictures. Each click of the camera seemed to echo in the night's silence, a grim reminder of the monstrous act he had just committed. But Brandon wasn't satisfied with just the photos. He wanted the world to know what he had done. He wanted the attention that had always been denied to him. He wanted to be seen as more than just a friend or orbiter. He wanted to be remembered, even if it was for the most terrible reasons. Brandon posted the photos on social media, along with a disturbing message, "I'm so sorry, Bianca." He knew this would attract attention, knew people would be horrified, but that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted everyone to know that he had been rejected and that his reaction was brutal and final. What he didn't anticipate was how quickly the news would spread and the chaos that would ensue. Within minutes, the photos began to circulate, being shared and commented on by people in shock. Bianca's name began trending, but not for the reason she or anyone else would have imagined. Meanwhile, Brandon began organizing the scene, moving Bianca's body out of the car and laying out a large green tarp on the ground. He placed her on the tarp, partially covering her, as if trying to hide what he had done but at the same time perversely displaying his work. He knew the police would soon be there and wanted them to see what he had done. He wanted them to know that he was responsible for it. With the tarp in place and the photos circulating online, Brandon began to think about his next move. He knew his life as he knew it was over. There was no turning back, no way to escape the consequences of what he had done. But Brandon, in his twisted mind, saw this as an opportunity to make one last statement. He grabbed a spray can he had brought with him and began to paint on the ground next to the tarp. The words he wrote were a grim testament to his mindset. "May you never forget me." He knew he wouldn't be forgotten, but for the worst possible reasons. As he finished painting, he heard the distant sound of approaching sirens. The police were coming, and he knew his time was running out. But instead of fleeing, Brandon stayed where he was, waiting for them to find him. He wanted them to see him. He wanted them to stop him. But before that, he did one last thing. He took a selfie, his face pale and stained with blood, the knife still in his hand, and posted it on social media with the caption, "Ashes to ashes." One last provocation, one last attempt at control, even knowing the end was near. When the police finally arrived at the scene, what they found was a nightmare vision. Brandon, still holding the knife, was lying next to Bianca's body, the green tarp partially covering her, but not enough to hide the brutality of what he had done. The officers approached cautiously, guns drawn, unsure of what to expect. Brandon, for his part, remained still, watching them with a disturbing calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Drop the weapon," one of the officers shouted. his voice firm but with a note of urgency. Brandon looked at the knife in his hand as if considering his options. For a brief moment, he thought about getting up and running, but he knew it would be futile. Instead, he brought the knife to his throat and made a superficial cut, more to shock and manipulate the officers than to actually end his own life. Blood began to trickle down his neck, but the wound was shallow and clearly not life-threatening. The police, now aware that he posed no immediate threat, advanced cautiously, ready to disarm him and take him into custody. Brandon, offering no resistance, let the knife fall to the ground and raised his hands in surrender. The expression on his face was one of strange satisfaction, as if he had fulfilled his final objective. As he was handcuffed, he didn't say a word, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if in a deep trance. The officers led him to the squad car, while others approached Bianca's body, their faces contorting in horror as they took in the brutal scene. News of Bianca's death spread quickly, and soon the crime scene was surrounded by curious onlookers and reporters. Bianca's name, once unknown outside her inner circle, became a symbol of tragedy and horror on social media and in newspaper headlines. But contrary to what Brandon had planned, the attention was not directed at him in a positive light. Instead, he was immediately labeled a monster, someone who had committed an unforgivable act in the name of a sick obsession. While Brandon awaited his fate in prison, the impact of his actions continued to reverberate in the lives of those Bianca had left behind. Her mother, Kim, devastated by the loss, had to face not only the pain of losing her daughter, but also the cruel reality that images of Bianca's body were circulating online, shared by people with no respect for human dignity. Bianca's family, united in their grief, launched a campaign to remove these images from the internet and ensure that no other family would have to endure the same torment. The following months were a whirlwind of legal battles and court proceedings. Brandon, in a desperate attempt to avoid the maximum sentence, initially pleaded insanity, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. His online searches, meticulous preparations, and implicit confession in his social media posts painted a clear picture of premeditation. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to avoid a prolonged trial, but the sentence was severe: 25 years to life with no possibility of parole. Despite Brandon's conviction, the nightmare for Bianca's family was far from over. The fight to remove the images of her death from the internet continued, with the family launching a public campaign to pressure social media platforms to act more responsibly. Bianca's Law, as it was called, sought to establish new standards for removing harmful content, protecting victims and their families from being re-victimized by online violence. Even as the years pass, the memory of Bianca Devins remains alive, not just as the victim of a horrific crime, but also as a symbol of resilience and love in the face of darkness. Her family and friends remember her as a young woman full of potential, whose light was tragically extinguished far too soon. Bianca was someone who had fought her inner demons throughout her youth and had finally emerged stronger, ready to embrace life with a new sense of purpose. She was set to begin her college journey, studying psychology with the hopes of helping others who, like her, had faced mental health challenges. But that opportunity was stolen from her, leaving behind only memories of the bright future she could have had. For her family and friends, Bianca's legacy is not just one of loss, but also of a fight for justice and awareness. They have become advocates for change, ensuring that Bianca's death serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the digital age. The battle to remove the gruesome images of her death from the internet and to hold those platforms accountable continues to this day, driven by the belief that no family should ever have to suffer the additional pain of seeing their loved one's final moments exploited for clicks and views. Bianca's story, though heartbreaking, has sparked important conversations about the responsibilities of social media companies and the impact of online behavior. It has raised awareness about the vulnerabilities of young people in the digital world, particularly those who, like Bianca, seek solace and connection online. Her tragic end has become a catalyst for change, pushing for stronger protections and more vigilant monitoring of content that can cause irreversible harm. As we reflect on Bianca's life and the senseless violence that took it, we are reminded of the importance of empathy, respect, and the need to protect one another, both online and offline. Her story serves as a cautionary tale, but also as a beacon of hope that through collective action and awareness, we can create a safer, more compassionate world. Bianca Devins may no longer be with us, but her impact continues to be felt. Her memory is honored not only by those who knew and loved her, but also by the countless people who have been moved by her story. Her legacy is one of resilience, of fighting against the odds, and of a family's unwavering commitment to justice and change. In remembering Bianca, we are called to action, to protect the vulnerable, to stand against cruelty, and to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. As you move forward, carrying the weight of Bianca's story with you, ask yourself, how will you contribute to making the online world a safer place? How will you stand up against the injustices that continue to plague our society? Bianca's life was cut short, but her legacy lives on through those who refuse to let her memory fade. In her honor, let us all commit to being more vigilant, more compassionate, and more determined to protect the innocent from the darkness that sometimes hides in plain sight. Welcome to Spooky Stories. I'm Milo, your guide through the chilling and the unknown. Here, we dive into terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Join our community of thrill seekers, and let's explore the darkness together. If you're curious about how I keep my concentration, efficiency, performance, and mental health at their peak every day, I'm going to share with you 2 resources that I use daily in my video creation routine. First, breathing for sleep. This method is essential for my deep, restful nights, ensuring I wake up refreshed and ready to create high-quality content. And the best part? It's super easy to incorporate into your routine. And then there's the 7 seconds at-home ritual. This ritual is backed by 4 neuroscience studies and helps to supercharge my brain power, keeping my focus sharp throughout the entire day. Want to try these resources and feel the difference in your routine? The links are right here in the video description and pinned in the comments. Don't miss this chance to elevate your productivity and mental well-being. Now that you understand the dark side that can lurk behind the quest for fame and validation on social media, it's time to reflect. Are you prepared to face the consequences of your online actions? Do you really know who is on the other side of the screen? Or are you just being lulled into a false sense of security and control? The truth is, in the digital age, the line between admirer and predator can be thinner than you think. So, how will you protect your privacy and safety moving forward? And more importantly, how will you use this knowledge to navigate the vast online world more consciously and safely? If you want to keep learning about the hidden dangers lurking in the shadows of online life and understand how to protect yourself, subscribe now to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any new stories and can continue deepening your knowledge on topics that could literally save your life. Let's journey together towards a safer and more informed life. Are you ready for this change?